Only 24 episodes, just one season. So why, more than 60 years later, does the Jetsons still make us feel like it never disappeared? In 1962, when most of today's technology still seemed like science fiction, George Jetson was living in a world with video calls, smartwatches, robot maids, and machines that did almost everything for humans. But the strangest thing about the Jetsons is not found in the future, because this famous animated family actually shared some remarkable similarities with another family America had known for decades. Today, we're counting down 20 weird facts you may not have known about the Jetsons. And stay until number 20, because one of the show's most beloved characters was actually not nearly as modern as she appeared. And the reason behind that says more about the Jetsons than you might think. Before we begin, if you love classic television shows like this, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now let's fly back to Orbit City. Number 1, Jetsons. The movie fired Judy Jetson. By the late 1980s, the Jetsons was more popular than ever. Reruns were everywhere. The revival series attracted a huge audience, and Universal Pictures saw an opportunity to bring Orbit City to the big screen. The result was Jetsons, the movie, released in 1990, with the goal of capitalizing on the wave of nostalgia and bringing the franchise into a new era. But things did not go the way Universal had hoped. In the movie, George is promoted to senior vice president at a new Spacely Sprockets mining colony on an asteroid. That forces Jane, Judy, Elroy, Astro, and Rosie to leave Orbit City, and no one is happy about the move. When they arrive, George discovers that the factory is constantly being sabotaged, while the 4 executives before him have mysteriously disappeared. The culprits turn out to be the Grungies, a peaceful alien species living underground who are watching their home being destroyed by the mining operation. In other words, this is the Jetsons, but with an added environmental message. Some critics praised the movie for addressing corporate ethics and sustainability, while others felt the message was a little preachy. But the real drama happened behind the scenes. Janet Waldo, who had voiced Judy Jetson since 1962, had completed all of her dialogue for the movie. Then, at the last minute, Universal decided to remove her recordings and replace her with teenage pop star Tiffany, hoping to attract younger audiences and capitalize on the popularity of her music career. The decision was so controversial that voice director Andrea Romano asked to have her name removed from the credits in protest. The movie cost only about $8 million to produce, but Universal spent another $12 million on promotion. In the end, it earned $20.3 million at the box office. Technically, it made a profit, but it was far from the blockbuster the studio had expected. But the story did not end in theaters. When the movie appeared on home video and television, it finally found its audience. It gradually became a familiar part of childhood for kids growing up in the 1990s, even though most of them had no idea that the movie had once struggled at the box office, or that somewhere in the archives there was still a completely different version of Judy Jetson. Despite its flaws and the chaos behind the scenes Jetsons, the movie ultimately accomplished one important thing. It took an entire new generation on their first trip to Orbit City. Number 2, the final recording session became one of the most emotional moments in animation history. Few animated characters have been as closely connected to their voice actors as George Jetson was to George O'Hanlon. George's slightly frantic, constantly stressed way of speaking was not simply acting. It was O'Hanlon's signature comedic style.
What a spot. It'll take a bigger brain than mine to figure an answer out to this one. Aye, that's it. The brain.
But the story of his final days recording Jetsons. The movie has become one of the most haunting stories in animation history. And like many other legends, the truth behind it is even more powerful. By 1989, O'Hanlon's health had seriously deteriorated. After suffering a major stroke in the late 1970s, he was no longer able to read scripts on his own or record with the full cast. To allow him to continue playing George in the revival series and the movie, the crew had to use a special method. The voice director would read each line, then O'Hanlon would repeat it into the microphone. Despite his declining health, the familiar voice of George Jetson remained intact. He recorded most of his dialogue for the movie in one day, then returned the next day to complete a few final additional lines for scenes that had already been recorded, And during that recording session, O'Hanlon suffered a stroke and died right there in the studio. Over the years, the story has often been told that his final words were a line spoken as George Jetson, almost like a perfect farewell in the role he had been connected to for decades. But according to voice director Andrea Romano, the truth was far more heartbreaking and ordinary. As the medical emergency began, his reported final words were, George, are you all right?" It was not a line from the script, but a real moment of confusion as he collapsed. After O'Hanlon died, Hanna-Barbera still had several unfinished lines. Actor Jeff Bergman was brought in to complete the rest of George's dialogue, while also replacing Mel Blanc, who also died during the production of the movie. Jetsons. The movie was ultimately dedicated to the memory of both George O'Hanlon and Mel Blanc, and the credits ended with a simple but emotional tribute as Astro softly says, "Roo, ro, RGE." That moment, rather than the story that had been passed down over the years, became the true farewell, Astro saying one final goodbye to the man who brought Orbit City's most unfortunate father to life. Number 3. The version of the Jetsons you remember depends on when you were born. Which version of the Jetsons did you grow up with? The answer may reveal which generation you belong to. The original series had only 24 episodes before ABC stopped airing it in 1963, but they quickly began airing again on Saturday mornings on ABC, CBS, and NBC for more than 2 decades. Gen X kids grew up with these 24 episodes, and Orbit City became a familiar sight. The reruns even made more money than the show did during its primetime run. High ratings and strong merchandise sales made Hanna-Barbera realize they had canceled a show that still had plenty of appeal. So in 1985, The Jetsons was officially revived. There were 41 new episodes, followed by 10 more episodes in 1987, more than doubling the total number of episodes. Original voice actors such as George O'Hanlon, Penny Singleton, and Mel Blanc all returned, even though many of them were already in their 70s and 80s, making the new version feel more like a continuation than a remake. Orbit City was upgraded as well. Rosie went from a character who appeared in only 2 episodes to a regular presence. Astro got more screen time, and the Jetson family adopted Orbity, an alien creature with spring-like legs that could change colors and look like a rejected Pokemon prototype. The animation became smoother and brighter, the stories leaned more toward science fiction, the laugh track disappeared, and the theme music was given the distinctive synth style of the 1980s. The success of the revival eventually paved the way for Jetsons, the movie in 1990. So if you are Gen X, you probably remember the Jetsons through those original pastel-colored episodes. If you are a millennial, your memories may be of the bright neon version with Orbity bouncing around everywhere. No matter which generation you belong to, you still grew up in Orbit City, just a different version of it. Number 4, Judy Jetson almost debuted as a real-life teenage pop star. Judy Jetson was not just Orbit City's stylish, boy-crazy teenage girl. She almost became Hanna-Barbera's secret weapon for creating a real-life pop music phenomenon. Years before the Archies reached number 1 with Sugar Sugar, the studio was already thinking about turning an animated character into a music star. From the very beginning, Judy had the image of a space-age pop idol. From her fashion and hairstyle to the singer she idolized, everything suggested a futuristic rock and roll loving teenage girl. In the episode A Date with Jet Screamer, she was even associated with the unforgettable song Eep Op Ork Ah Ah Means I Love You, the kind of song a teenager in the 1960s might actually call a DJ and beg to hear again. But Hanna-Barbera wanted to go further. Behind the scenes, they considered turning Judy into a real pop artist, complete with singles, promotion, and even her own music career. The idea was entirely possible because Hanna-Barbera had its own record label and also worked with Golden Records. Imagine an animated version of Britney Spears, only with more sparkle and a jetpack. But the original series ended too soon, and the plan never had a chance to take off. By the 1980s and 1990s, the idea unexpectedly came back to life. In Jetsons, the movie in 1990, Judy was voiced by teen pop star Tiffany, who also recorded 3 songs for the soundtrack, including the single I Always Thought I'd See You Again. By then, the strategy was obvious. Decades later, the The studio was finally trying to turn Judy into the teen idol they had imagined back in the 1960s. And if you ever watched the 1988 special Rockin' with Judy Jetson, you saw them take the idea even further. Judy joins a band, faces an evil queen, and practically saves the entire galaxy with the power of pop music. Clearly, turning Judy into a music star was more than just a passing idea. It was once an entire direction Hanna-Barbera genuinely wanted to build for the character. Number 5. Real buildings helped create Orbit City. For decades, the Jetsons has been seen as a bright vision of the 21st century. Flying cars, floating apartments, robot maids, and all kinds of futuristic technology. But surprisingly, the Hanna-Barbera artists did not have to look very far to imagine Orbit City. They only had to look outside. Because in 1962, Los Angeles already had a future of its own called Googie architecture, also known as Populux. If the name sounds unfamiliar, you have almost certainly seen it. Boomerang shapes, roofs that look like flying saucers, and bold angles. This style appeared all across mid-century Los Angeles.
That's exactly what it looks like. That's what it was designed to look like, a flying saucer with its legs extended out onto the ground. It was built in 1961, so kind of right at the dawn of the space age, and everybody kind of had a big imagination.
It was designed to scream, "The future!" at every driver stuck on the boulevard. Steel, glass, glowing starbursts, and sweeping curves. This was the kind of architecture that fully believed that by 1985, people would be relaxing on Mars. And the Hanna-Barbera artists, their studio was surrounded by exactly that. So Orbit City ultimately looked like a collection of Los Angeles' most striking architectural features. The LAX theme building, the giant white flying saucer-shaped structure at the airport, almost looks like a model for the corporate buildings in Orbit City. The chemosphere, the round house sitting on a slender column in the Hollywood Hills, looks like it belongs in the Orbit City real estate market. Even Los Angeles diners and coffee shops were filled with neon lights, sharp angles, and looked ready for aliens to stop by for a slice of pie. Then there was Tomorrowland at Disneyland, a theme park that genuinely believed moving sidewalks would save humanity. Put all of that together, and you practically have the look of the Jetsons. So this was not exactly a prediction of the future. It was more like a love letter to the wildest architectural fantasies of that era. The influence became so widespread that the name Googie gradually faded into the background. Today, many people simply call it the Jetson or Jetsonian style. Imagine being an entire architectural movement, only to end up being overshadowed by a guy who spends all day complaining about his 3-hour work shift. Number 6. George and Jane were originally fired and then sued Hanna-Barbera. Before George and Jane Jetson had the familiar voices they would keep for more than 60 years, the two roles actually belonged to someone else. Hanna-Barbera originally cast Maury Amsterdam, famous for The Dick Van Dyke Show, as the voice of George, while comedian Pat Carroll played Jane. Both signed contracts for all 24 episodes at $500 per episode. In other words, the entire season was already locked in. But almost immediately after recording the first episode, Hanna-Barbera suddenly replaced both of them. No warning, no explanation. George O'Hanlon and Penny Singleton were brought in, while Amsterdam and Carroll were simply pushed out of Orbit City. And the two actors did not walk away quietly. They sued Hanna-Barbera, each demanding $12,000, exactly the amount they would have earned if they had completed all 24 episodes. Carroll later admitted that she did not even expect to win the lawsuit. What she wanted was for the studio to acknowledge just how unprofessionally they had handled the situation. The real reason was only revealed later, and it turned out to involve the sponsors. Amsterdam was appearing regularly on The Dick Van Dyke Show, while Carroll was appearing on The Danny Thomas Show. Advertisers apparently did not want the two actors playing a pair of futuristic animated parents, while also appearing in sitcoms on competing television networks. Rather than confront the demanding sponsors, the studio chose the simpler solution: replace both actors. Amsterdam and Carroll ultimately did not win the lawsuit, but their confrontation still left its mark as one of the earliest and most notable contract disputes in television animation. Number 7. The Jetsons accidentally predicted half the things in your home. One reason the Jetsons has never disappeared from popular culture is simple. Every time you use a modern device, you get the feeling, wait, didn't the Jetsons already have this? And in quite a few cases, the answer is yes. When it premiered in 1962, the show was not trying to be a prophecy. It was simply taking advantage of the space-age craze at the time. Yet this pastel-colored animated family accidentally imagined a whole range of technologies that we would consider completely normal decades later. A perfect example is video calling. George and Jane were casually using FaceTime long before Zoom made attending meetings in pajama pants acceptable. And those wrist-mounted screens used by Elroy and his friends? They look a lot like early Apple Watch prototypes at a time when real computers were not even small enough to fit in your pocket. The giant wall-mounted screens in Orbit City now immediately remind us of flat-screen TVs and tablets. Rosie still has not shown up to fold our clothes, but the small disc-shaped vacuum cleaner that accompanies her is basically the spiritual ancestor of the Roomba. The show even touched on telemedicine. In one episode, George swallows a peekaboo capsule that can transmit images from inside his body to a doctor. Today, we actually have capsule endoscopy. The Jetsons simply imagined it before medicine gave it an official name. Flying cars still have a way to go, but the drone-like vehicles in the show look increasingly familiar in a world with DJI drones and Amazon delivery prototypes flying overhead. Even the Jetsons' just-push-a-button lifestyle is gradually becoming reality. Smart homes, automatic lights, voice assistants, smart refrigerators, and digital news. If Rosie had Wi-Fi, she would probably fit into today's world without any trouble at all. Of course, we still do not have a 3-hour workday, and flying cars are not exactly lining up at the DMV. But when it comes to the everyday technologies we actually use, the Jetsons predicted the future with strangely impressive accuracy. Number 8. George Jetson's job is actually a joke. Literally. One of the oldest mysteries of the Jetsons is not how flying cars work or why nobody falls off those floating sidewalks. It is, what does George Jetson actually do for a living? The answer is basically nothing at all, and that was completely intentional on the part of the creators. George's job title at Spacely Sprockets is Digital Index Operator, which sounds important until you realize that his job basically consists of pushing a button. And yet George constantly complains that he is overworked. But that is exactly the joke. In the early 1960s, America was fascinated by the idea that automation would eliminate most actual work. Machines would do everything, while humans would only have to handle simple and easy tasks. The Jetsons took that vision and pushed it to the extreme. George barely has to lift a finger, but he is still stressed, still worried about losing his job, and still scrambling to please Mr. Spacely, one of the grumpiest bosses in the world. And that is the real satire. Even in an ideal future where machines do almost everything, your boss will still find a way to ruin your day. So the vagueness surrounding George's job was not the result of sloppy writing. It was a deliberate wink at the audience. Futurists once promised that technology would free humans from work, but the Jetsons offered a funnier possibility. Maybe technology would simply free us to complain more efficiently. Now, before we fly straight into the next fact, here is a question for you. If you could bring exactly one thing from the world of the Jetsons into your life today, what would you choose? A flying car, Rosie, the food machine, or a work week of only a few hours? Pick just one and write it in the comments. I would really like to know which one will win. Number 9. The Jetsons and the Flintstones finally met, and it was a wonderful mess. For years, fans often joked that the Flintstones might actually be the ancestors of the Jetsons. One family belonged to the Stone Age, while the other lived in the Space Age, so it seemed like they would never have a chance to meet. But in 1987, Hanna-Barbera decided to erase that gap of millions of years with the Jetsons Meet the Flintstones, one of the biggest animated crossovers of the decade. Airing on November 15, 1987 as part of Hanna-Barbera Superstars 10, the special finally put Fred Flintstone and George Jetson into the same story. And just as you might imagine, the result was a chaotic series of hilarious jumps through time. It all begins with Elroy Jetson, who builds an entire time machine for a school project. The family plans to use it to travel farther into the future, but Astro gets a little too excited. With just one wag of his tail, the dog accidentally switches the controls from the future to the past. Instead of moving forward, the Jetson family is sent straight to the suburbs of Bedrock. There they are discovered by Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble, while the two are camping after both of them have just lost their jobs. Things become even more interesting when another malfunction reverses the situation. The Flintstone and Rubble families are transported to Orbit City. People accustomed to living with rocks, dinosaurs, and foot-powered technology now have to navigate a futuristic world, creating a true fish out of water comedy. The reunion becomes even more special because nearly all of the familiar voices return, including Penny Singleton, George O'Hanlon, Gene Vanderpyle, and Henry Corden. Mel Blanc even played two familiar characters at the same time, Barney Rubble and Astro. After years of existing only as a fan joke, the special finally connected the two worlds. The Flintstones and the Jetsons really could exist in the same universe, separated only by a few million years and one not very reliable time machine. Number 10, The Jetsons was almost destined to fail from the very beginning. A show about flying cars and a push-button lifestyle sounds like it was made to succeed, but The Jetsons was canceled after just one season, and there were two major reasons why its future was almost decided from the start. When ABC premiered The Jetsons in 1962, it promoted the show as a technological milestone, the network's first series to be broadcast entirely in color. Hanna-Barbera therefore created an incredibly eye-catching Orbit City, with neon cities, sparkling skies, and all kinds of colorful, futuristic gadgets. There was only one problem. Fewer than 3% of American households owned a color TV. ABC had created a bright, futuristic world for a country that was still mostly watching television in black and white. Instead of Orbit City glowing like Tomorrowland, many viewers only saw images that critics considered flatter and less appealing. The future suddenly looked a little gray. But the bigger problem was probably the time slot. ABC scheduled The Jetsons at 7:30 Sunday night, which meant it had to compete directly against two extremely powerful rivals. On NBC was Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color, the long-running family program that had recently moved to NBC and had already reached the top 25. The word color was no accident. NBC was owned by RCA, the company selling color televisions, so it aggressively promoted programs with bright, colorful visuals. Disney was also exactly the kind of show families regularly sat down to watch every week. Meanwhile, CBS had Dennis the Menace, a top 20 sitcom that was scheduled between Lassie and The Ed Sullivan Show. It was almost impossible to ask for a better lineup before and after it, so a completely new animated experiment from ABC had to compete at the same time with Disney's colorful spectacle and a hit sitcom sandwiched between two of the biggest shows in America. For a new program, that was almost an impossible mission. If ABC had simply waited another decade and chosen a different night, maybe George and Jane could have lasted 20 seasons and never had to sit in traffic again. Number 11, Astro was almost cut, and yes, he is basically Scooby-Doo. It is hard to imagine the Jetsons without Astro, the big, lovable space dog who talks as if he just swallowed an entire bag of consonants. But Astro almost never became a member of the Jetson family. And if his voice sounds like another famous Hanna-Barbera character, you are not imagining it. Don Messick voiced both Astro and Scooby-Doo, and he reused that same vocal style. The distinctive R sound, the tangled consonants, and the affectionate phrase, I raw roo roo rouge. That was the same kind of voice that would later help make Scooby-Doo a household name. In other words, Astro was almost a prototype for Scooby-Doo. But before he became an icon, Astro's place in the family was far from certain. In his first episode, The Coming of Astro, the Jetsons have to choose between two pets. Astro, affectionate but a little chaotic, and Electronimo, a robot dog programmed to be almost perfect. George, of course, prefers the robot. Why put up with fur, mess, and real emotions when you can own a dog powered by a motherboard? The family even holds a competition to decide who gets to stay, and Electronimo beats Astro in almost every challenge. But then a burglar breaks into the apartment. Electronimo is programmed to attack anyone wearing a mask, so the burglar simply puts his mask on George. As a result, the robot dog turns around and chases George instead of catching the criminal. And Astro? He is hiding because he is scared, but while trying to escape, He accidentally runs straight into the burglar and knocks him unconscious. Was it heroic? Not exactly, but it worked. George immediately softens and decides to keep Astro. Electronimo is given to the police, where his attack anyone wearing a mask programming can finally be put to good use. And just like that, Astro stays. Choosing a real dog instead of a perfect robot gave the Jetson family something audiences could connect with emotionally. Among all the flying cars and space-age machines, Astro brought something much more familiar: warmth, silliness, and something very human. Number 12. George Jetson never actually used that dog-walking treadmill. If you remember only one image from the Jetsons, there is a good chance it is George Jetson frantically spinning around on an out-of-control treadmill. The moment became so famous that it has been parodied everywhere, from Animaniacs to Family Guy. But there is a pretty surprising fact. That scene never appeared in any episode of The Jetsons. It actually only appeared in the end credits. George is taking Astro for a walk outside the apartment complex using a futuristic dog-walking treadmill. At first, everything is completely normal until Astro sees a cat and immediately takes off after it. The treadmill speeds out of control, leaving George trapped and spinning around endlessly like a rotisserie chicken in space. While he desperately struggles, Astro and the cat simply sit there, calmly watching him. That is the entire joke. One of the most famous images associated with George Jetson exists only in the credits. In the actual episodes, George never used that treadmill. Number 13. The Jetsons theme song unexpectedly became a hit in the 1980s. You know a theme song is truly catchy when, 60 years later, it is still stuck in the audience's head. But making it onto the Billboard charts more than 2 decades after the show was canceled is a completely different story. In 1962, Hoyt Curtin wrote the theme song for the Jetsons with one very simple task: to get audiences excited about entering Orbit City. It was never created to become a single, never charted, and no one thought it could become a hit. Everything changed in 1985 when Taft Entertainment released television's Greatest Hits Volume 1, a collection of classic television theme songs. Somehow, the melody from the Jetsons suddenly became popular with audiences again. Radio stations began playing it constantly, from stations specializing in novelty music to mainstream rock and pop. Listeners called in to request the song so often that DJs could hardly escape George Jetson. So an idea emerged: record the theme again in stereo and release it as an actual single. And surprisingly, it worked. By April 1986, the cheerful cartoon melody from 1962 had climbed to number 9 on Billboard's retail sales chart. Hoyt Curtin was reportedly extremely surprised. And who would not be? One minute you are writing music for a cartoon about flying cars, the next your work is on the charts alongside Madonna and Huey Lewis. A 24-year-old theme song made it into the top 10. It seems America really just needed to hear Meet George Jetson one more time. Number 14. The Jetsons is basically Blondie in space. The biggest inspiration for the Jetsons actually did not come from science fiction, but from a comic strip that began in the 1930s, Blondie. The franchise was once extremely popular, with the comic strip, 28 live-action movies, a long-running radio program, and the image of a sitcom wife that all of America had become very familiar with. From the very beginning, Hanna-Barbera built the Jetsons as a futuristic version of the Blondie formula. The family structure was almost identical: a good-natured but clumsy husband, a smarter and more resourceful wife, and a grumpy boss who was always yelling. Dagwood became George, Blondie became Jane, and Mr. Dithers became Mr. Spacely. But the clearest connection was Penny Singleton. Hanna-Barbera cast the very actress who had played Blondie as Jane Jetson. Singleton had become a familiar image of the American housewife for more than a decade in movies and on radio. Audiences in the 1960s could recognize her voice almost immediately. Because of that, even though The Jetsons takes place in the year 2062, the family still felt familiar, trustworthy, and relatable, just like a traditional sitcom. It was an extremely smart choice. If The Flintstones was the honeymooners set in the Stone Age, Then the Jetsons was almost Blondie brought into the space age. Singleton's warm but straightforward style made the futuristic world feel more ordinary. Floating apartments, flying cars, and food preparation machines suddenly seemed like natural extensions of suburban life. For viewers who had grown up with the Blondie movies, hearing Jane Jetson was like meeting an old friend again. Except this time, she lived in the sky, had a robot maid, and even had a Futuraka cycle. Number 15. Rosie the Robot is a cheap robot model, and that is exactly the point. For many fans, Rosie the Robot is practically the face of the Jetsons, the sarcastic robot maid who is not afraid to talk back to George when he deserves it. But there is an interesting detail. Rosie is not a piece of cutting-edge technology for the Jetsons to show off their status. She is actually an old, inexpensive robot model. In the pilot episode, Rosie is introduced as the XB500, an older demonstration model from the U-Renomade service. Newer, sleeker, and more luxurious robots are available, even with fancy voices so the neighbors know just how successful you are. The only problem is that the Jetsons cannot afford them. Even in 2062, a middle-class family still has to consider the budget when they want to upgrade their appliances. And that is completely intentional. Rosie was designed to be outdated to show that class differences and money worries still exist, even in a world with flying cars and food replicators. The future may be automated, but the kind of automation you get to enjoy still depends on how much money you have. However, there is one thing that many people remember incorrectly about Rosie. Despite appearing prominently in the opening and being deeply embedded in viewers' memories, she actually appears in only 2 episodes of the original 1960s series. That is right, only 2 episodes. So why does Rosie feel so much like a main character? Because when the Jetsons was revived in the 1980s, she became a regular character. Rosie appeared constantly, delivering funny lines, handling household crises, and gradually becoming an essential part of the Jetson family. It was the revival that transformed Rosie from a lovable supporting character into a true fan favorite. Rosie's outdated design eventually became part of her charm. The Jetsons could have replaced her with a newer, flashier robot model, but they never did. And honestly, that is probably one of the most heartwarming details about the Jetson family. And those are 20 weird facts about the Jetsons that you may have never known. More than 60 years later, George, Jane, Judy, Elroy, Astro, and Rosie still make the futuristic world of Orbit City as memorable as ever. Now it is your turn. Which fact surprised you the most? And if you could live in the world of the Jetsons, which technology would you most want to own? Share your answer in the comments below. If you love behind-the-scenes stories and little-known secrets about classic television shows, do not forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss our next videos. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the video. Wishing you good health, lots of happiness, and we will see you again in the next story.